Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our recorded webinar chat on the Older Americans Senior Nutrition Program entitled Policies That Work for Providers and Participants. This webinar chat is part 2 of a 2-part series. I'm your host, Katherine Shavo, currently a Senior Nutrition Consultant with the Administration for Community Living, Office of Nutrition and Health Promotion Programs. I'm a registered dietitian and formerly a State Unit on Aging Nutrition Program Manager. In a perfect world, state units on aging, area agencies on aging, and local service providers take the time to work together to provide consistent policies that give flexibility and limit barriers for participants. We do not live in a perfect world, but with a little planning for communication methods, this can be achieved. The purpose of this chat is to provide information for state units on aging on applying flexibilities of the Older Americans Act. Examples will be given on how flexibilities may be used in policy development to delegate authority that extends flexibility to AAAs and local service providers. As a programmatic note, during this chat, we may refer to the Older Americans Act as the OAA, state units on aging as SUAs, and area agencies on aging as AAAs. You may have heard the Older Americans Act is flexible, but what does that mean? Understanding what policies must be at the state level and which policies can be at the area agency on aging or local service provider level is important. Having policies delegated to the right level enables person-centered nutrition services, which can lead to greater efficiency in serving more older adults in your community. Policies are the basis for operations in the senior nutrition program and provide a roadmap on how to accomplish the intents of the OAA. The OAA recognizes the diversity across our nation, in each community, and in each state. Therefore, states are given considerable flexibility in developing policies, and that is what the term inherent flexibility means. The OAA Senior Nutrition Program policies become more specific the closer you get to direct services. The SUA sets statewide policies which are broad in scope, such as each AAA shall ensure all nutrition service providers and caterers comply with all federal, state, and local health laws and ordinances. AAAs set more defined policies for their area that are consistent with the state policies, such as meal providers shall have a detailed policy and procedure manual for food safety activities. And finally, local service providers set specific service-oriented policies that are consistent with the AAA policies. So to complete this example, service providers' food safety manual would outline details such as when food temperatures are to be taken and recorded and specify acceptable corrective actions. This, of course, is a simplified example. Nutrition business operations constantly change. Things like offering new service models, embracing technology to serve new demographics, and let's not forget changes that happen at the state, federal, and local laws that impact us. So if policies aren't kept up to date with changes, the policies no longer fit the purpose. A policy that no longer works as intended may become overly restrictive or even become a barrier to providing services effectively. For example, we saw this play out during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some programs in the network had a homebound requirement defined by level of care for home-delivered meals. They soon discovered it was a barrier to feeding those in need of a meal who were not homebound due to frailty or illness. Our speaker today will provide information on their experience and methods for developing policies that work for both providers and participants. I think you'll find the information very useful. Today we'll be speaking with Sara Koenig, Elder Nutrition Program Manager in the Bureau of Aging and Disability Resources at the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. Hi, Sara. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you for joining us. I'm sure the audience is very interested to learn more about your policy approaches and in your state. But first, let's get a picture of Wisconsin. Tell us a little bit about the makeup of the aging network in Wisconsin and to help the audience understand a little bit about the scope of the agencies you work with.
Sure. Wisconsin has a unique structure to its aging network. We have 3 AAAs. The 2 smaller AAAs are units of county government, representing Wisconsin's 2 most populous counties. Milwaukee County Division on Aging includes Wisconsin's largest city and metro area of Milwaukee and is almost entirely urban. The AAA of Dane County includes Wisconsin's 2nd largest city, Madison, and its surrounding cities, but also has a significant portion of the outskirts of its planning and service area that is rural. The Milwaukee AAA contracts with service providers, including a service provider that serves its 5 county-owned senior centers. Dane AAA also contracts with service providers, several of which are community-based focal points, such as senior or community centers. Our third and largest AAA is the Greater Wisconsin Agency on Aging Resources, or GWAR for short. GWAR's PSA makes up the remaining 70 counties and 11 federally recognized tribal nations in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, state statute requires every county and tribe to have an aging unit. So GWAR's service providers are all county and tribal governments, or in a few cases, nonprofit agencies designated by a county government to act as the aging unit or aging services provider. I should also note that in Wisconsin, we have 49 ADRCs, or Aging and Disability Resource Centers, which provide information and assistance and options counseling for long-term care, most of which are integrated with those county aging units. So in other words, part of the same organization or co-located, and the 7 tribal Aging and Disability Resource Specialists, which facilitate coordination between the ADRC and the tribal aging unit or government. In addition, GWAR has a contractual partnership with Great Lakes Intertribal Council to provide training, technical assistance, and support in culturally appropriate ways to the tribal nations of Wisconsin. As you can see, our 3 AAAs are very different from one another and therefore have different approaches to aging services.
Wow, I didn't know y'all had that kind of diversity in Wisconsin. That's really interesting. Thank you. Well, I know you've been working on updating your policies recently. Tell us how Wisconsin policy, tell us how you approach policy development in Wisconsin.
Sure. I strive to maintain a continuous process for obtaining feedback on policies from AAAs and local service providers, much of which is informal and gathered from on-site reviews and meetings with service providers and AAAs. Also, as policy-related questions are asked by AAAs and providers, we have a process for cataloging these questions in an internal decision log. The decision log documents the question asked, our response, and the statutory reference, along with some other context. This decision log helps us document our responses in case the question is asked again, but it also, from a policy perspective, informs updates and clarifications to our state policy that might be needed.
Awesome. I like the idea of that decision log. How often are policies reviewed for revisions and new policies?
Admittedly, we have not updated our state policies in some time, since 2011 for most of our programs. But for the state nutrition program policies, we updated those in 2016. And I have just completed updates to those policies again now for 2023. And they are currently going through our final review as part of our department's policy review process. We are currently engaged in a large effort to move our entire state policy manual from print to online on our state Unit on Aging's Aging SharePoint site, and also integrate the state aging policy with the state ADRC policy. In doing so, we're revising content chapter by chapter, reorganizing the content and creating more links between the chapters so that the content is more seamless. A revision schedule has been developed to ensure that the policies will be reviewed annually going forward and then revised as needed.
Sounds like a lot of work that will be very useful in the long run too. That's great. What prompts a revision of policies?
Older Americans Act reauthorizations and updates to state and federal regulations definitely prompt reviews of nutrition program policies. For example, if our state food safety code is updated or the dietary guidelines for Americans are updated, that would prompt a review of our state policies related to food safety and nutrition standards, respectively. Questions or feedback from the AAAs, from our service providers and aging units, and our state aging advisory council are also primary drivers of a review of policy. Typically, those questions lead to internal discussions, and we evaluate whether the changes are needed. We have implemented a procedure where we create a copy of the current chapter of the policy manual and use track changes to highlight areas that we want to focus on when the chapter is revised and the proposed changes that we want to make in the next revision.
And who is involved in developing and revising the Older Americans Act Senior Nutrition Program policies in Wisconsin?
Well, at the state level, my supervisor, who's the Older Americans Act program supervisor, and a program and policy analyst from our Office of Resource Center Development, which is the office that administers ADRC programs and services. Those two individuals are primarily responsible for developing, revising, and/or coordinating the development and revision of state aging and ADRC policies. But in regard to nutrition program policies specifically, I have a dual role as both the Elder Nutrition Program Manager and a program and policy analyst. So I'm heavily involved in not only the nutrition program policy, but also supportive services, health promotion, and fiscal and service reporting policies. So I work very closely with my supervisor to develop and revise state policies. Because of the way Wisconsin's network is organized with county and tribal aging units, much of the policy development at the local level is done by county and tribal aging units. And as a reminder, 2 of our 3 AAAs are also county aging units. So the nutrition directors in those area agencies on aging do a significant amount of policy development as well. Both counties and tribes in Wisconsin have a lot of autonomy over their operations. So there is a tradition and a continued desire at the local level to retain that responsibility as it relates to the development of their own policies and procedures.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Now, earlier I talked about how the Older Americans Act recognizes diversity across the nation in each state and in each community, and that states are given considerable flexibility in developing policies for their nutrition projects. In your policy review and revision process, have you found any policies that need to be revised in order to better meet the needs of program participants?
Yes, we have. Congregate meal services are required to be available 5 days per week in each county or tribe, but we have had a slight shift in thinking on requiring a single meal site to be open 5 days per week. This shift in policy has been well received by nutrition programs in both rural and urban areas. Urban areas have been able to partner with more organizations in a given community so that a variety of services can be offered in various neighborhoods. Rural areas have been able to reach people in more communities so that more eligible individuals know about our services. This has also increased opportunities to socialize in their own communities versus traveling to other communities, which they may not have the resources to do, or other factors like weather might impede their travel. An important aspect to this policy is the use of the USDA Food Access Research Atlas to identify areas with limited food access. The atlas is pretty easy to find if you Google it, and it's a really neat resource. The areas identified as having limited food access in the atlas must have meals available 5 days per week.
So there are some meal sites that are required to be open 5 days a week. Do I understand you correctly?
Yes, our programs are required to make meals available 5 days per week within their service area, no matter what. And there are some locations, those lower access areas, that are required to have meals 5 days per week. But because of that requirement to have meals available 5 days per week within their service area, that might mean that some dining sites are open on certain days of the week and others in another community or a community close by might be open on other days of the week.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. Now, can you tell us how the decision is made to set a policy at the state level versus the area agency level or at the local service provider level?
Sure. These can be really challenging decisions to make, but I've learned a lot in the most recent revision of our state nutrition program policies. Sometimes it's really easy for us to just create more state policies to address problems without even realizing it as a result of the feedback we're receiving from various sources in our day-to-day work, or those problems or programmatic issues that we're working to solve. Part of our policy revision process includes a comment period during which Aging Network staff at the AAA and provider level have, in the case of the nutrition chapter, a 30-day comment period to respond with their feedback on the updated policies. I received a lot of feedback this time around, some of which helped me to realize that our AAAs and service providers do want more of a say in how they meet their community's needs. And the reality is that that's what the intent of the Older Americans Act really is. States, AAAs, and providers have some say in how to provide services based on what we know about our communities and what older adults are telling us they want and need. So I really had to take a step back and think about how to strike a balance between the need for consistency across the state, which is needed in some cases, versus when it was okay if one community or AAA or provider was doing things differently from another. A lot of times I would try to put myself in the view of the older adult receiving services to determine if consistency was necessary. Sometimes we have to ensure a certain level of service or safety, and that warrants a consistent policy statewide, but sometimes we don't.
Very good. Can you give us an example of a policy that is set at the state level?
One example is the required time frame before the in-home visit portion of a home delivered meal assessment, when that's completed. We did extend the time frame in this most recent revision from 2 weeks to actually 3 months. Short-term clients may have ended service before the assessment timeline, and others, like post-discharge payment participants, may only need meals for 6 to 7 weeks. And we need to have that assessment in the home environment. That's really important. So that's an area that we have retained at the state level. A second example is the requirement that all congregate dining centers, including restaurant models, have a dining site manager, which is a staff or volunteer who is essentially the connector to the AAA or provider. There's an opportunity for programs to waive this requirement and implement a voucher model, but they must apply to the AAA and demonstrate why the model with a site manager would not work and why a voucher model is needed. We have evidence that those site managers play a crucial role in meeting the objectives and purposes of the program related to the promotion of socialization at the dining sites and also the connection to resources. And they are the main reason our higher participating dining sites are reaching more older adults. Requiring this position helps us to ensure consistency and quality of services.
Very good. What are the advantages of the adjustments?
Well, policies are only good if programs have the capacity to adhere to them. The adjustments we made to the home delivered meal and home visit requirement allows our programs more time with their limited staff and volunteers to get these visits done, but they are still able to provide a better level of service for participants who need meals long-term. For many of our home delivered meal participants, this is the first aging service that they are receiving because Meals on Wheels or home delivered meals tend to be more well-known in the community. Performing that in-home visit can help get them connected with other aging services that they might not know exist, or they might not realize that they need, such as personal care or homemaker services or health promotion classes or caregiver support. I also think that when the state agency makes these adjustments, it provides clarity to the network about the why. In other words, the intent of the policy. It also seems to spur innovation for our AAAs and providers. If they know that change is possible, they can come up with some out-of-the-box ideas for meeting the intent of a policy and feel comfortable offering it to the State Unit on Aging for consideration.
Are there any disadvantages to these adjustments?
Sure. Sometimes when adjustments are made, as the policy is implemented, there's a chance that it's not implemented in the way that we had intended. This occurred in our last round of updates to the nutrition standards, where adjustments were made to the state recommended meal pattern in the hopes of increasing variety, and the result has actually been less variety. So sometimes things like that can happen. Also, there are always going to be AAAs or providers that aren't completely satisfied with the adjustments that are made. One challenge of the feedback process is that we often only hear from those who are unhappy with a policy. So as a result, we might make adjustments that the majority of the network didn't want or need. I have learned to make it clear during the feedback process that we also want feedback on policies that are working well.
That's important, yes. Can you share an example of a policy that was delegated to the AAA level and how that policy was designed?
Much of the policies delegated to the AAAs have to do with ensuring equity and fairness in service delivery and adherence to the intent of the Older Americans Act, since they have a closer role to their service providers and can better evaluate what is needed in the communities in their planning and service area. So some examples might be AAAs having the responsibility to review voucher model requests and evaluating the effectiveness of a voucher model. Another example might be AAAs providing nutrition programs with support to ensure that all older adults in the program's service area have reasonable access to congregate meals 5 days per week. So they make that decision about what is reasonable. And another area that, a couple other areas that AAAs have more autonomy over is the meal prioritization processes in their AAA. Again, because of the diversity between the 3 AAAs in our state, we felt that it's best that those prioritization tools and decisions are made at the AAA level with, of course, consultation with the state agency. And then procedures for offering carry-out meals. We've also left that to the AAAs to determine whether or not they want to allow carry-out meals and also, the circumstances or requirements around that. Much of the policies delegated to the provider level are those where consistency across the counties and the tribes either isn't critical to the participant's experience as the recipient of services, or where differences in resources might prevent more consistency. So we might ask that they document their policies or procedures so that we can ensure they meet the intent of the Older Americans Act, but we allow them the flexibility to create and implement their own policies and procedures. So again, some examples of that might be the decision to offer carry-out meals, again, if the AAA allows that. We allow them to enter into agreements with one another to serve different areas of their county or tribe that might be underserved. And we allow service providers to have some autonomy over areas where they might have their own policies already as a county or a tribal government. So some things like procurement or grievance procedures or codes of conduct for participants. A lot of times they have those policies already, so it doesn't make sense for us to create more policies at the state level.
And I'm sure that's appreciated. What are the advantages of delegating these policies to the AAA or local level?
Well, offering that flexibility can give AAAs and service providers the opportunity to use their creativity to solve problems in their own way. For example, by offering the flexibility to provide carry-out meals, AAAs and service providers can adjust their programs to address things like driver shortages. Having the flexibility to work with one another across program boundaries can help programs manage demand in areas they might not have resources to serve. And this is also true of counties and tribes that work together to serve Native and non-Native elders in their service area. So we have a lot of coordination that happens, and they have the ability to make those decisions.
Are there any disadvantages to delegating the policies?
The most significant disadvantage from my perspective is the potential for inconsistency across the state and even from one county to another. We never want to see participants in one county or tribe receiving a different type or level of service than they would if they reside in the county or the tribe next door. So this is where it can get really challenging to strike that balance between the desire for programs to be the same or consistent, and also the need for them to make decisions about how to provide those services based on their local needs and resources.
And how did the state work with the AAAs in the carry-out meal scenario?
Well, since Older Americans Act programs are federal programs, there aren't any residency requirements. So programs can't deny services to individuals who come to a congregate dining location or a carry-out meal distribution site from another county or tribe. If they're seeing a large influx of participants from outside their service area, though, they have the ability to work with the county or the tribe to see if there are opportunities to share resources to serve those individuals. The state and the AAA have provided support in the creation of some sample agreements between counties and tribes or some sample language. We can help parse out the best case scenario for how they can collaborate to meet both parties' needs, such as who will be responsible for the registration and the screening processes, or the NSIP reporting, or paying for the meal, or the collection of participant contributions, things like that.
Okay. And how is the delegation of this policy working in Wisconsin?
I think it is working well, but in some ways we don't know anything different because of the way that we're structured. Sometimes delegation of policy to the local level can result in some healthy competition between programs. So for example, if one program sees another doing something really well, they want to do it too. And I think that helps spur some innovation across the state that I'm really proud of. I also think sharing some of the responsibility for policy development creates buy-in for AAAs and service providers.
That's nice to hear. Competition's good. What recommendations do you have for others at the state or even AAA level who may be looking to refresh their policies or change how they approach policy development?
Some recommendations I have. One is to allow for a comment period on any policy revisions from your statewide network, and take those comments and feedback seriously. But also avoid listening to only the loudest voices. Make sure that you're also getting feedback on aspects of the policy that should not be changed, as we talked about earlier. So the things that people like, so that you can take that into account. I would also recommend including an effective date for any policies that you create. For nutrition, I've learned that these changes, particularly if they affect contracts with food providers or service providers, those require time to implement. And then finally, I would think about the end consumer or the participant. Are the policies you're creating at the state level ensuring a consistent quality of service for the participant? And does the policy need to be a state policy, or is some inconsistency okay?
Well, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that thoughtful approach that Wisconsin takes. It appears to be working very well for you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
You are very welcome. And thank you again for that. You shared actionable information and examples that I think everyone can relate to. We have heard examples of how standardization at state level policies can be useful and how delegating policy development can provide flexibility that improves service delivery. The senior nutrition program has proven to be beneficial to older adults. However, if older adults are not participating, they are not benefiting from services. By having a review process for senior nutrition program policies, you can potentially expand service flexibility for local service providers, that it leads to increased efficiency, person-centered services, and innovation. So I want to thank you for watching today. I will share Sarah's contact information and the link for the Nutrition and Aging Resource Center where this webinar and associated resources can be found. If you go to acl.gov/senior-nutrition, you can click on Browse Resources and then Business Management to find policies and procedures. Program evaluation can be found on the Resource Center under the OAA requirements. So thank you again for speaking with me today, Sarah.
Thank you, Katherine. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're more than welcome. And thank you to the audience for watching. I hope you found this webinar helpful. Please check the Nutrition Resource Center, the National Resource Center on Nutrition and Aging often. We have more webinar chats planned to include managing policies and procedures and working creatively within policy boundaries. So thank you again, and everyone, you have a great day. Bye now.